They laughed as they dragged me into court,
Let me
mocked
hear
me in
y'all
front
say
of
the rhyme.
cameras, called me a thug, a
Right,
liar,
Uber.
a nobody.
Firmado say
Two
less.
racist cops shoved me into a chair like I was just another criminal statistic. But what they didn't know, what they never imagined, was that the man they put on trial in handcuffs was the director of the FBI. And I was there by choice. This is not just a story about racism, corruption, or injustice. This is the story of what happens when the system underestimates the one man sent to expose it from within. And it all began the moment they called me boy, in a courtroom built to bury men like me. You think you're somebody, huh? Walking in here like you own the place. Sit down, boy. That's what Officer Trask spat at me as he shoved my shoulders down onto the hard wooden chair in the courtroom's holding cell. His voice echoed through the narrow concrete hallway like a whip crack. The steel door clanged behind me, sealing me into a space barely wider than a broom closet. I sat there, hands cuffed, jaw-clenched blood, humming like electricity through my veins. He had no idea. To them, I was just another black man in a jumpsuit, another name on the docket, another defendant with no one in the gallery. They didn't know that 3 feet beneath this standard-issue orange uniform sewn into the fabric at my back was the scar left by a bullet I took while rescuing a hostage in Syria. That my call sign used to ring out over encrypted Pentagon radios. That I am the director of the FBI, but today I was undercover. And this was exactly what I needed to see. I never wanted to be famous. I wanted justice. I wanted to clean up what rots from the inside, the corruption, the profiling, the racism dressed up as law and order. I was born in Atlanta, raised on grit and gospel, forged in the fires of the Marine Corps, before earning my way into the Bureau. I clawed my way past barriers built by fear and bias. But even with a badge and a rank, I knew if you really want to know how deep injustice runs, you have to stand in the shoes of the invisible. And so I became one. 2 months earlier, a confidential memo crossed my desk. A string of mysterious wrongful arrests, all involving young black men. The pattern was clear: phony warrants, false charges, and every time processed through the same courthouse. Precinct 19, Jefferson County. I had a gut feeling. I trusted it. So I handed over my badge, signed a sealed directive, and vanished. No backup. No camera crew. No FBI jacket to throw open dramatically. I became Elijah Cole, a war veteran turned homeless. A quiet man who spoke little and carried the weight of the world in his walk. It didn't take long before I was stopped. The night it happened, I was sitting outside a diner cradling a hot coffee I had bought with the last few coins in my borrowed wallet. The temperature had dropped. My fingers were stiff. A cruiser pulled up. 2 white officers stepped out. Trask and Delaney. "Hey, you match a suspect description," Trask had said before I even looked up. "Stand up, hands behind your back." I didn't resist. I knew the script. I'd read it 100 times. Now I was living it. They never read me my rights. They never told me the charge. Just cuffs, a nightstick against the ribs, and laughter. Oh man, Delaney had snickered. "This one actually looks scared. Thought y'all were tough." That's what brought me here. In cuffs. In court. As I sat in the holding cell, I heard them outside in the corridor talking loud, mocking loud, because they thought I couldn't possibly be someone worth respecting. Heard this guy claimed he was ex-military, Trask said. Bet he couldn't make it through boot camp. "I bet he cries if we raise our voices," Delaney chimed in. They laughed like hyenas, unchecked, unafraid, unaware. But what chilled me wasn't their words. It was the silence of everyone else. the bailiff who didn't flinch, the clerk who looked away, the court reporter who typed without pause. All of them knew. This wasn't new. When they brought me to the courtroom, I scanned the faces, mostly white, some bored, some smirking. Nobody looked shocked. Nobody cared. The judge glanced down, lips pursed like he'd smelled something bad. "Name," he said flatly. "Elijah Cole," I answered. No reaction. The prosecutor stepped forward, a young, smug man in an overpriced suit. He read charges fabricated from thin air, resisting arrest, assaulting an officer, drug possession. All lies. There were no drugs. There was no struggle. But they had planted enough evidence to keep this circus going. I watched the defense attorney assigned to me a public defender with a stack of cases and eyes too tired to care. He didn't question the arrest. He didn't call for evidence suppression. He just asked, "Do you want to take a deal?" I said no. Then came the moment that made my blood run cold. The prosecutor leaned on the rail and turned to the gallery, pretending to speak to the judge, but really speaking to the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is not just another petty criminal. This man assaulted 2 officers. He threatened the peace of this community. He fits the pattern." He said it with a smile. He fits the pattern. I looked around. No one blinked. No one said, "That's profiling." No one objected. That was the moment I realized just how bold they had become. They thought this game would never end, that no one was watching, that no one had the power to burn it all down. But they were wrong, because while they mocked me, while they insulted my intelligence and my humanity, the very people they feared most were already in the building. The FBI's Internal Affairs Division was watching through hidden lenses and wires stitched into the seams of my jumpsuit. Every word, every smirk, every slur, documented. And when this trial hit its boiling point, when they tried to coerce a plea, when they fabricated body cam footage, those same cameras would replay everything they had done behind the scenes. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to see how far they would go. Back in the holding cell, after the mock hearing, Officer Trask leaned in close. His breath smelled like chewing tobacco and rot. "You know what I think, Cole," he whispered. "I think you'll disappear like the rest of them. Maybe next time you'll think twice before mouthing off." He pressed a finger to my chest. "You're nobody." I locked eyes with him, and in that moment, without words, he knew something had shifted. Maybe it was the way I didn't flinch. Maybe it was the calm in my stare. But for the first time, his smirk faltered. I smiled, just barely. Later that night, in the solitude of my cell, I whispered into the microphone, stitched behind my molar. "Phase 1 complete. Tomorrow, we take off the mask." Outside, Jefferson County Courthouse slept soundly. Inside, the storm had already begun. It was 8:55 a.m. when they brought me into the courtroom again, still shackled in that same faded orange jumpsuit. Still just Elijah Cole to everyone in the room. The bailiff grunted, guiding me with unnecessary force toward the defendant's table like I might leap up and bolt. But I had no reason to run. I was already exactly where I needed to be. From my seat I scanned the courtroom. Trask and Delaney were there again, sitting tall like local heroes, smug in their uniforms, basking in attention they didn't deserve. Behind them sat the usual gallery strangers reporters, a few court regulars. No family for me. That was part of the plan. No one to humanize me. No one to advocate. Just a ghost of a man trapped in a system built to bury him. And the judge, Judge Walton, an old pale-faced man with a silver robe of indifference, barely raised his eyes as he muttered my case number. State vs. Cole. He never saw the storm that was coming. The prosecutor, Andrew Maddox, walked forward with the swagger of someone who thought he'd already won. "Your Honor," he began. "We intend to present evidence today showing a clear pattern of aggression from the defendant. He assaulted 2 officers during a routine stop, resisted arrest, and was found in possession of narcotics. We believe this individual poses a danger to the community." Danger. It was almost amusing how fast they used that word. Dangerous because I was silent. Dangerous because I was calm. Dangerous because they couldn't read me. But the truth was, they didn't need to. Because they had already written the ending to my story. Or so they thought. The public defender, Ms. Gray, barely lifted her head. She mumbled something about the defendant pleading not guilty. That was all. No protest, no fire, no fight. But that was fine, because the real defense wasn't going to come from her. It was coming from me, and from the people already waiting in the shadows of this courtroom. Mr. Cole. The judge said, his eyes half-lidded. "You are aware that if you are found guilty, you face up to 10 years in state prison." I nodded slowly. "I understand, Your Honor." "And you still choose to proceed without a plea agreement?" "I do." He sighed as if I were wasting his time. "Very well. Proceed." They brought the first witness, Officer Delaney. He stood, adjusted his badge like he was preparing for a photo shoot, and walked to the stand with the gait of a man who'd testified 100 times. He was good. Polished. Too polished. I remember the evening clearly, he said. The suspect was loitering outside a diner. When we approached him, he became hostile. We asked for ID, he refused. We attempted to detain him, and he attacked my partner. Maddox nodded along, prompting him like a coach. And did he resist violently? Yes, sir. He was aggressive, combative. We feared for our safety. They all used the same words. Feared for our safety. That phrase had buried thousands of black men, but not this time. The moment Delaney finished his testimony, I leaned forward. Calm, controlled. "Your Honor," I said. "I'd like to represent myself from this point forward." The courtroom rippled. Judge Walton raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that, Mr. Cole?" "Very." Ms. Gray looked relieved. She slid her files toward me and practically melted into her chair. "Very well," the judge said reluctantly. "You may proceed." I stood and walked slowly toward the witness stand. Delaney's smirk remained, but his fingers twitched. I began gently. "Officer Delaney, you stated I was loitering outside the diner. What time was this?" "About 9:15 p.m. "Was the diner open?" Yes. So I was outside an open business, with a coffee cup in hand." "Yes." "Did I make any threats to customers block the doorway?" "No, but so just standing with a coffee is now cause for arrest." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The courtroom had gone still. I turned to the jury. "We've just established that sitting outside an open diner, holding a cup of coffee, doing nothing wrong, was enough to provoke an arrest." Then I turned back. "Let's talk about the alleged drugs." He shifted. "We found a small bag of powder in the suspect's coat." "Which coat?" "The brown one he was wearing." I leaned in. "The same coat that was sitting on the bench 20 feet away during the incident." "The one I didn't touch the entire night." He paled. Maddox stood. "Objection." Sustained, the judge barked. But it was too late. The jury had heard it. I wasn't just poking holes. I was unraveling them. Then came Trask. He tried to play the tough guy. Leaned back in the chair like this was a joke. "So let me get this straight," I said. "You claim I lunged at you." "Yes." "With what hands?" "My hands were cuffed the moment you approached, correct." He paused. "I don't remember. Would you like to see the footage?" He froze. There was no body cam footage submitted by the prosecution. They said it was corrupted. But I had other footage. It was time. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I respectfully request permission to present evidence in my defense. He looked annoyed. Mr. Cole, this evidence is admissible under Rule 403. I have legal precedence and the original audio-video file on this encrypted drive. I placed the drive on the clerk's table. He leaned forward. Where did you obtain this? And that's when I did it. I reached into the inner seam of my jumpsuit, pulled out the hidden micro badge stitched into the lining, and held it high. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I am not Elijah Cole, the homeless veteran. I unclasped the jumpsuit collar. My name is Director Marcus Elijah Cole, head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The courtroom exploded in chaos. Trask's face went pale. Delaney whispered, "Oh my God." The judge pounded his gavel. I came undercover to expose corruption, systemic abuse, and perjury inside this precinct and this courtroom, I said, clearly loudly for every hidden camera to capture. You've been caught. Every lie, every insult, every planted piece of evidence recorded. The bailiff moved toward me in confusion. The gallery stood in disbelief. I turned toward Trask and Delaney. You should have checked who you were mocking before you spoke. You just laughed at the man who signs your background clearance. And then I nodded once toward the doors. FBI agents in suits stepped in, badges up. You're both under arrest, the lead agent said. Charges include perjury evidence, tampering, false imprisonment, and civil rights violations. Trask tried to run. He didn't make it 5 feet. I sat back down unshackled, as the courtroom pulsed with the electricity of truth, finally unchained. The judge didn't say a word. He just watched as the agents walked the officers out of the courtroom, not in triumph, but in disgrace. And the jury, they stood, not for me, for justice. The courtroom was still ringing with the echoes of the truth. Reporters stormed through the double doors. Cameras flashed. Phones lit up. For the first time in my 22-year career, I watched justice land like a thunderclap, live, raw, and undeniable. But I knew better than to celebrate, because real justice doesn't stop when the cuffs close. That's when the firestorm begins. I was escorted not as a prisoner this time, but as Director Marcus Elijah Cole through the courthouse back corridors, while an army of agents swept the premises. Every hard drive, every personnel file, every logbook from Precinct 19. Sir, Special Agent Lisa Choi said beside me. Earpiece, buzzing eyes, sharp behind her glasses. You sure you're ready for what comes next? I glanced at her. Lisa Choi, 34. Korean-American, a rising star in counterintelligence. Tactical suit. 5'8" of steel nerves and razor intellect. She had been my eyes on the outside, coordinating every move while I was deep undercover. I've never been readier, I replied. The press conference happened within the hour. On the steps of the Jefferson County Courthouse, a podium was flanked by U.S. Marshals. Cameras lined the streets. The same reporters who once ignored my trial now shoved microphones forward, hungry for the truth. I stepped up to the mic. My voice was clear, controlled, calm. My name is Marcus Elijah Cole. I am the director of the FBI. A hush fell over the crowd. I went undercover as a wrongfully accused man to investigate systemic racism, corruption, and constitutional violations being carried out within Jefferson County law enforcement and judicial branches. Behind me, 2 screens flared to life showing side-by-side footage from the hidden body cameras sewn into my uniform. Trask mocking me. Delaney lying. The planted bag. The courtroom's silence. It was all there, unfiltered. The public's reaction came like a tidal wave. News anchors wept on national television. Civil rights leaders called it the most damning revelation in a decade. Hashtags exploded. Justice for Elijah. Director Cole. Truth in disguise. But for me, it wasn't about glory. It was about the families who'd watched their sons get railroaded. It was about the innocent who still sat in prison because no one had believed them. And yet, even as the world burned with fury, I returned to FBI HQ to find a storm waiting at my own doorstep. At the top of the stairs stood Deputy Director Harold Benton, a heavy-set white man in his 60s, bald with a piercing stare. Gray suit, maroon tie. He had once been my mentor. Now he looked like he'd swallowed a nail. "You went rogue," he said flatly, no greeting. "I went deep," I corrected. "You risked everything." "I exposed everything." He paused. Then he looked past me toward the screen on the wall showing Delaney's arrest replaying on CNN. "You've just cracked open the entire justice system." I nodded. Good. Back in my office, where the windows overlooked the Potomac and the walls were lined with medals, I sat down to review the damage. 3 precincts had launched internal reviews. A state senator called for the judge's resignation. And more than 20 cases linked to Trask and Delaney had been paused. But what hit hardest was a letter, handwritten, left on my desk. "Dear Mr. Cole, my name is Jamal Turner. I'm 17. I saw your trial on TV. I was arrested last year. They said I fit a description. They beat me. They laughed. I thought no one would ever care. Now I know someone does. Thank you. JT." I closed my eyes. That was the real verdict. But peace was short-lived. 2 days later, my office line rang at 3:17 a.m. Troy's voice was calm but tense. "Sir, there's been a fire." My heart stopped. "Where?" "Precinct 19. The evidence locker." I stood up. "Arson." "No doubt." "And, sir, there's more. One of the jurors in your case, Jonathan Reyes, was found unconscious in his home. Possible poisoning." The corruption wasn't just local. It was fighting back. I called for a full-scale response. The Bureau's elite task force was activated, Operation Clean Sweep. Agents embedded in the deepest pockets of the legal system began tracing the rot. We were no longer investigating a crooked precinct. We were confronting a network, bribes, threats, missing witnesses, and at the center of it all, someone named Redstone. A code name, no face, no files, just whispers. And one goal silenced me. I flew back to Jefferson County under protection. The town had changed overnight. Protesters flooded the streets with signs and tears. Trask's house had been vandalized. Delaney's name was stripped from every record. But I didn't go back for closure. I went back to visit the families. One by one I met them. Mothers clutching photos of sons they thought lost to the system. Fathers whose voices cracked with long-buried rage. Children who now knew what courage looked like. I didn't wear a suit. I wore my hoodie. I sat in their kitchens. I listened, and I promised them this wasn't the end. That night, I walked past the same diner where it all began. Same cracked sidewalk. Same flickering neon. A young black man stood outside with a backpack, looking tired. Nervous. I approached him. "You okay?" I asked. He looked me up and down. "They stopped me earlier. Said I looked suspicious. Did they do anything?" "No, I think they recognized you." I smiled faintly. "Good." He hesitated, then asked, "Are you really FBI?" I looked him in the eyes. I'm what the FBI should be. But as I walked away, a message buzzed on my secure phone. One word: Redstone. and a GPS pin, a location far from Jefferson County. This wasn't over. The GPS coordinates pulsed on my screen like a heartbeat. They led to a private estate nestled in a rural corner of North Carolina. Secluded, guarded, silent. This was it. The center of the storm, Redstone. Whoever or whatever Redstone was, they had started moving, burning evidence, intimidating jurors, sending messages. They knew I was coming, and I had no intention of knocking politely. Before dawn broke, I was in the Air black SUV, tailing the horizon toward a compound surrounded by tall pines and higher fences. It didn't look like a criminal lair. It looked like money, old money, the kind that builds walls not just of steel but of influence. Agent Lisa Choi was in the passenger seat reviewing satellite footage. "There's a tunnel entrance behind the west garage," she said. "No cameras inside. That's your point of entry." I nodded. My heartbeat was steady, my mind razor sharp. I wasn't just the director of the FBI today. I was a man reclaiming the soul of justice. I went in alone. Tactical gear. Silent steps. Breathing synced with the rhythm of training ingrained over decades. The tunnel was colder than I expected, lined with old brick and whispers of money laundering, political blackmail, and years of operations carved beneath the surface of democracy. Then I saw it a steel door with a keypad. I placed my gloved fingers on the panel and spoke. "Elijah Cole." The door clicked. It knew me. Someone was waiting. The room beyond was dimly lit by hanging Edison bulbs, industrial and deliberate. At its center stood a desk, and behind it a man I had never seen before. He wore a gray three-piece suit, mid-50s, white, clean-shaven, hands folded, calm. "Director Cole," he said smoothly. "I was hoping we'd meet." "Redstone," I replied, my voice flat. He nodded. "I prefer Nathaniel Royce, but Redstone is what they call me in the shadows, like a myth." He stood unhurried and walked to a wall of monitors showing surveillance feeds, courtrooms, police stations, political offices. "You think this is about two dirty cops, no director. This is a system, a machine. We don't rig the rules, we write them." I stepped forward. "You framed innocent people. You buried evidence. You tried to poison a juror. You think this ends with a smug monologue." Nathaniel Royce smiled, sipping from a crystal glass. "This ends how I decide it ends. You're out of your league." He pressed a button under his desk, and the lights flickered. A trapdoor hissed open behind me, and two armed guards stormed in. I had seconds, but I didn't hesitate. With a swift strike, I disarmed the first, using his own weight to throw him into the wall. The second lunged, but I dropped low, twisted, and disabled him with a knee to the side of the head. They didn't know I once trained Delta Force. Royce stood frozen. Blood from one of the guards stained his marble floor. I stepped toward him. "You came after me in the courtroom. You tried to burn the truth. You threatened civilians." He raised both hands. "I can make this disappear. You can have a seat in Washington 10 times bigger than the one you have now. I can make you a king. I'm not for sale." I pulled out a flash drive from my pocket, the same one connected to FBI servers live streaming everything in this room, and I dropped it on his desk. "Smile. You're going national." Back at HQ, Royce's arrest was broadcast within the hour. High-ranking officials were named. Banks were raided. Judges were disbarred. Dozens of officers from multiple precincts turned themselves in, terrified that they were next. The FBI's reputation, once tarnished by quiet compliance, was now blazing in headlines. This wasn't just justice. It was a reckoning. But not all storms settle quietly. The next morning, a car bomb detonated outside one of our field offices. 3 injured, 1 critically. A message scrawled nearby. Stay in your lane, Cole. I stood in front of the burning wreckage, fists clenched. You first, I whispered. Later that day, I returned to the courtroom in Jefferson County, not to testify, but to dismantle. One by one, I stood before wrongfully accused men and women and cleared their names. We reviewed every case Trask and Delaney ever touched. Charges were dropped. Sentences were vacated. The Judge Walton resigned before we could remove him. He left a note. The system was never designed for men like Cole. He was right. It was never designed for me, which is exactly why I'm going to rebuild it. That night I sat alone in my office. I thought of Jamal Turner, of the diner, of that cold courtroom and the smirks that turned to silence, and I made a decision. The war was no longer about exposing corruption. It was about erasing the soil it grew from, and that meant going further, digging deeper, into the very roots of America's justice system. Agent Choi, I said over the intercom. Yes, sir. Activate Project Purify. Silence. Then her voice returned. Are you sure? My voice didn't waver. It's time. History won't remember the exact moment Project Purify launched. There were no sirens, no headlines, no dramatic crackling over radios. But deep inside the Hoover building, in a sealed sublevel, only 4 people had access to something extraordinary stirred. This was my crusade, a full-scale offensive not just against corruption, but the mechanisms that made corruption invisible. Project Purify was born from necessity. Too many names. Too many lost years. Too many officers promoted after perjury, judges re-elected after railroading innocence, lawyers rewarded for turning trials into theater. I wasn't going to expose them one by one anymore. I was going to make their entire system obsolete. Agent Lisa Choi stood before the operations board, flanked by analysts and internal affairs. Phase 1 is forensic audit, she said. All judicial rulings from known precincts with flagged convictions. Phase 2 is AI-led pattern detection across police reports, court testimonies, and sentencing trends. Phase 3, direct field takedowns. It was beautiful, surgical, relentless, and dangerous, because enemies in suits are more patient and more ruthless than enemies in the street. 3 weeks in, we uncovered the unthinkable. A judge in Ohio sentenced black juveniles at triple the rate of their white counterparts despite identical charges. A private prison in Arizona funneled bonuses to arresting officers per body delivered hidden in community grants. A Louisiana law firm quietly paid off police informants to fabricate testimony. Every layer peeled back revealed another infected artery. My name was becoming legend and a threat. I walked the halls of the FBI like a marked man. Half the bureau admired me. The other half feared me. Whispers followed. He's rewriting the system. He's making enemies in Washington. Someone's going to shut him down. They tried. It started with a Senate hearing. I was summoned before a Judiciary Committee chaired by Senator Lowell Granger, a conservative, stalwart, white-haired, sharp-tongued, and furious that the FBI had dared to turn its eye inward. You're destabilizing confidence in law enforcement, he accused, pounding the gavel. I'm exposing why that confidence is broken, I replied. You're not the Justice Department. No senator. I'm what keeps it honest. Gasps. Cameras flashed. Hashtags trended again. But I knew I had just drawn blood from a sacred cow. That night they came after me personally. A leaked file surfaced online. False accusations, fabricated affairs, allegations of financial misconduct. All fake, all planted. But the real attack wasn't digital. It was human. My father. He was 82, retired Army, proud, quiet. He called me that night from his porch in Atlanta. "Marcus," he said, "2 men came by today, said they were reporters, but they asked about your deployments, about your mother." I felt the rage rise. "They came to our house," he sighed. "I told them nothing. But son, you're poking old ghosts. Just promise me you know where this ends." I closed my eyes. "I'm not turning back, Dad." Silence. Then, go finish it." The next morning, Choi burst into my office. "We've got a mole." She dropped a folder on my desk. I opened it. A name. Agent Royce Maddox. My jaw tightened. Maddox was from Internal Affairs. Young. Bright. Had volunteered for Project Purify early. He'd been leaking our targets, tipping off police unions' defense attorneys, even former FBI officials. And worse, he was the nephew of Senator Granger. I confronted Maddox in the parking garage off the record. "You've been feeding intel to the people we're investigating," I said. He didn't deny it. "Director, you don't understand the balance," he said. "If you expose too much, the public loses faith. Institutions collapse. I'm not here to preserve appearances. I'm here to save lives." Maddox leaned in. "They'll destroy you, Marcus. You think this job makes you untouchable? It makes you a target." I stepped back. "Then aim carefully, because I don't miss." We arrested him the next day. The Bureau split down the middle. Some saw him as a patriot. Others saw me as a tyrant. But the purge continued. Project Purify hit its stride. We released a digital database called Glasshouse, a public-facing portal where citizens could trace officer misconduct records, judge sentencing patterns, and access case archives. The backlash was seismic. Police unions declared war. Congress debated emergency oversight. And in the middle of it all, I stood firm. Because every time I opened that portal and read the names Elijah, Jamal, Keisha, Andre, I remembered why I started. This wasn't vengeance. This was redemption. And yet one name kept coming back. Redstone. Not Royce, the original one, the network. We found encrypted payments from Redstone-linked shell companies still active, still operating. And one of them had funded a campaign, a mayoral candidate. In Atlanta, my hometown. I flew there quietly. No escort, no suit. I walked the streets I grew up on. I saw the corner where my father taught me to throw a punch. The church where my mother once sang. And then I stood outside a sleek campaign office with tinted glass and gold signage. The man inside, Michael Granger, the senator's son, polished, smiling, running on a law and order platform. Funded by Redstone's corpse. I stepped inside. He didn't recognize me at first. Then he paled. "Director Cole," he said, "I'd like a word." The moment I stepped into that campaign office, silence swallowed the air. It wasn't just any office, it was his. Michael Granger, the golden boy of the South. Mid-40s, Ivy League educated, handsome in a made-for-TV way. Navy suit. American flag pin. His hands were folded as if he'd just said the Pledge of Allegiance, but the smile on his face evaporated the second he recognized me. "Director Cole," he said, standing from behind his glass desk. His voice was controlled, but his eyes darted, searching for an escape that didn't exist. I didn't sit. "Running for mayor?" I asked, scanning the walls lined with slogans like "Restoring Order" and "Safe Streets, Strong Future." "Trying to give back," he replied, feigning warmth. "Bring accountability to this city." I smiled. "Funny. That word accountability. You think it means getting ahead of an investigation." His eyes narrowed. "This isn't a federal matter." "You're right," I said. "It's a moral one." I reached into my coat and pulled out a dossier, thick and heavy. Campaign donations, shell accounts, Wire transfers routed through offshore trusts. Every cent tied back to the Redstone network. He didn't reach for the file, because he already knew what was in it. "You think this is new?" he asked softly, the mask beginning to crack. "You think political campaigns are clean?" "Everyone has donors. Mine just happened to be effective." I leaned in. "Your donors framed innocent men. Your donors poisoned jurors. Your donors tried to kill me." His jaw tensed. "And what happens if I don't drop out? If I keep running?" I didn't answer. I simply turned to the window behind him. Outside, across the street, 4 reporters with long lenses were already taking pictures. He followed my gaze and froze. "Check the news in 5 minutes," I said, walking away. "You'll understand what happens next." By the time I exited the building, the leak had gone live. FBI links mayoral candidate to criminal shadow network. Cable news melted down. Michael Granger's campaign crumbled before sundown. His donors vanished. His father, Senator Granger, called a press conference that night and with gritted teeth accepted responsibility for having overlooked unethical contributors. They tried to spin it. Too late. The Granger dynasty fell in a single day. But the real fight still raged inside me. This wasn't about politicians or podiums anymore. It was about the sickness beneath the country. The lie that said black men are threats. That justice is optional. That power excuses everything. I needed to go further, so I made the call. "Choi," I said over encrypted line. "Yes, sir. Project Purify's next phase. We're going public." There was a pause. "You mean—" "Yes. We show the people the process, the footage, the testimonies, every suppressed story, every buried file. Let them see the machine." The launch was massive. A 6-part documentary titled Invisible Evidence streamed on every major platform. Narrated by me. Shot in real courtrooms. Interviews with exonerated prisoners. Hidden recordings of crooked judges. Police body cam footage never shown in court. Within hours it hit 30 million views. Within a week, Congress had to respond. A bill was drafted. The Coal Justice Integrity Act. Independent oversight for local courts. Mandatory misconduct tracking for officers. Federal protection for whistleblowers. And me, I became a target all over again. One night I returned to my apartment in D.C., and there it was, the door ajar. Inside, everything looked untouched until I reached my bedroom, spray painted on the wall. Traitor to the badge. And lying on my pillow a broken FBI lapel pin. I didn't flinch. I picked it up, brushed off the paint, and wore it the next morning on live television. But the final blow came quietly. A memo arrived from the White House. "Effective immediately, the President is requesting your resignation." I sat in my office alone, staring at the letter. Not because I didn't expect it, but because I knew this was the price. Truth has no comfort. Agent Choi entered slowly. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Did they give a reason?" "They said I've made the Bureau too political. That I've become a symbol of division." She scoffed. "You became a symbol of truth." I smiled weakly. Apparently, that's the same thing now. The press room was packed. I stepped to the podium for the last time. I didn't read from notes. I didn't wear my medals. Just the pin they tried to break. I am stepping down today, not because I'm ashamed I began, but because my presence makes cowards nervous. I was framed, mocked, shackled. But I rose. Not for revenge, but for redemption. For every person who sat in a courtroom and prayed, anyone would see the truth. I saw it. And I did something about it. I may no longer be your director, but I will always be your witness. When I left the building, I wasn't alone. Across the street, hundreds had gathered, holding signs, chanting my name, and one young man stepped forward. It was Jamal Turner. He saluted. "Sir, you changed everything." I looked him in the eyes. "No, son. You did. I just made sure the world couldn't ignore you." After the cameras stopped flashing, after the applause faded, and the reporters moved on, I stood on the courthouse steps and looked out at the crowd. No badge, no title, no shield between me and the people. I had given them everything. My reputation, my career, my peace. And in return, they gave me something I never expected: a movement. The first rally was spontaneous. 100 people outside the FBI headquarters. Then 1,000 outside City Hall. Then 10,000 marching across the Brooklyn Bridge with signs reading, "Truth needs no badge. We are all Elijah." Cole was right. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about what I stood for. And that terrified the people in power more than any badge ever could. Within weeks, communities across the country began demanding access to the glasshouse system. Citizens wanted to check the records of the judges sentencing them, the officers pulling them over the lawyers, pleading their cases. City councils resisted. Then they fell, because every time they said no, another video leaked. Another story surfaced. Another family spoke out. I hadn't just launched an investigation. I'd lit a fuse, and the people were the fire. But the cost? It came in waves. Threats against my family. Hackers targeting my accounts. One night, my father's car was torched in his driveway. He called me, voice steady. "I knew this might happen, son. But you're doing what I fought for. What we bled for." "I'm not scared," I said. "I know," he replied. "But be careful. They are." The former FBI leadership issued a statement distancing themselves from me. Senator Granger resigned quietly, citing health concerns. Michael Granger disappeared from politics entirely. And yet I knew that the real battle wasn't in headlines. It was in hearts. So I did what no former director had ever done. I went back to the streets. I spent weeks walking into churches, community centers, high school gyms, not to speak, to listen. To the mother who lost her son to a wrongful conviction. To the father who taught his kids to say yes, sir, to survive a traffic stop. To the boy who watched my trial and decided to study law. They didn't want speeches. They wanted hope. And when I spoke, I gave it to them. Not with fancy words, but with this: "If no one else will protect you, I will." That's when the idea came. Not a think tank. Not a task force. A citizen task bureau. Volunteers. Retired attorneys. Ex-officers with integrity. Students. Grandmothers. Former inmates. We called it the People's Bureau. No weapons, no uniforms. Just truth, transparency, and action. They investigated abusive cops. They brought pressure on shady judges. They showed up to town hall meetings with body cams and questions. It spread like wildfire. From Atlanta to Oakland to Chicago to Flint. Justice wasn't a privilege anymore. It was a practice. Then came the twist. One morning, I opened my email and saw a message from an encrypted address. Subject line, "You're not done yet." Inside, a folder. Dozens of names. Photos. Case files. A voice file played, "You went after the soldiers. Now it's time to unmask the generals." It was from Royce Maddox, the man I had arrested in Chapter 5. From inside prison, he had flipped. What he gave me was explosive, a hidden layer of the Redstone network, not just local officials, federal judges, lobbyists, former FBI brass. They had built an empire from incarceration fear and suppression. And Maddox, he wanted redemption. I met him in prison. He was thinner, quieter, But there was fire in his eyes. They threatened my family, he whispered. But watching what you did, watching you stand it, broke me. I want to help now. I looked him in the eye. Then help me finish it. The next year was a blur. We launched Justice Unseen, a global platform that trained everyday people to audit their own justice systems. Translated into 19 languages. Used in 38 countries. Other nations began following suit. South Africa, Brazil, Philippines. They called it the Cole Doctrine. It was no longer about me. It was about what happens when one man refuses to sit down. And then one quiet evening, I walked back into the same diner where it all started. Same cracked tiles, same broken jukebox. I ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and for the first time in a long time, breathed. A young man walked in, hoodie pulled low, clearly nervous. He looked at me. "Are you him?" I nodded. He sat. "I want to help. I got stories. People listen to me. I don't know how to start." I slid a napkin toward him, wrote one word, "Listen," because that's where justice begins. Not in courtrooms, not in badges, but in listening to those the system tried to silence. They mocked me because of the color of my skin. They shackled me because of the power of my silence. They tried to erase me because I stood for something they couldn't control. But the truth doesn't beg. It builds. It burns. And when it's spoken by the right voice, it breaks chains. I walked into that courtroom in cuffs, but I walked out with a nation behind me. Because justice isn't a system, it's a choice, and the meaning of life. It's not power. It's not revenge. It's purpose, fighting for those who have no voice, no shield, no platform, until you hand it to them. If this story moved, you don't just scroll past. Subscribe to this channel. Drop a comment, tell us how you would stand up if it happened in your town. Share this video to remind the world that one voice can start a movement, because sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one who dares to tell the truth.